So this is going to be a quick rundown on the Halloween and Vienna Gambits in the open games. What's the difference between them? How do we deal with them as black? Again, trying to give you the least effort possible solution. So let's start with the Halloween Gambit. White plays e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6. So it's a variant of the four knights game. Now white plays knight takes e5. So this is a dubious gambit, but it has its points. So after knight takes e5, d4. So white gave up a knight for black's center pawn, and in return, white has achieved the classical pawn center and is going to use the pawn center to control the center of the board and drive black's pieces back, keep black pinned down. That's the philosophy of the Halloween Gambit. So two things you have to keep in mind. First of all, black is up a knight for a pawn. And secondly, white's compensation is based on the strength and flexibility of the pawn center. So with that in mind, the correct move for black, in my view, is to play knight c6. Just put the knight back where it came from. And now there's three moves we're going to look at here. I mean, the two most important moves are e5 and d5. So what happens when white pushes this pawn? What happens when white pushes this pawn? We'll start out by looking at e5. So this knight is attacked, right? White controls all of these squares. So the knight's got to go back to g8. That's a forced move. And here, white has some options. We'll look at d5 first. d5, this is just an outright bad move, d5, because the pawn at d4 was responsible for protecting the pawn at e5. So black in return just plays knight takes e5 and wins a pawn, and you're up a piece for nothing here. Done deal. So that's d5. It's impossible because white needs to protect e5. So there's f4. So this protects e5, and the goal is to follow up with pawn to d5. But before white can do this move, we play d5 first. This move, d7, d5, is very important, not just in the Halloween Gambit, but in all gambits in the open games. Where white is sacrificing a pawn, for some positional gain. Black needs to liberate the position with d7, d5. So keep this move in mind. Black's ability to play this move is often part of, if not the complete answer, to gambits in the open game. Black wants to play d5, even if it's to sacrifice a pawn. It's just to liberate the development of black's position. So d5, this move stops the white pawns in their track. These pawns are now fixed on dark squares. And black wants to do a blockade strategy on the light squares. h5, g6. The bishop can land on e6 or f5. This knight can come out and protect f5. So we blockade on the light squares to prevent white's center from getting anywhere. Because the whole basis behind the Halloween Gambit is that white has a powerful pawn center. So white cannot afford to allow it to get blockaded like this. The only valid try for white here to prevent black from playing d5 is to play bishop c4. So here, I feel black should play d5 anyway. Now, this move looks incredible, right? Because white is attacking d5 with two pieces, and it's defended only by the queen. But you have to look a little bit deeper in that there's an attack on d4 as well. So the d4 pawn can be x-rayed through the d5 pawn, so to speak. Let me show you how this works. So bishop takes, and then knight g7. So this bishop is now attacked. We're attacking it twice. It's defended by the knight. If the bishop retreats, so if the bishop retreats, just say it goes to, bishop b3. Well, now we have two pieces hitting d4. So just queen takes d4. Now queen takes e2, bishop g4, hitting the queen, trying to provoke this pawn weakness, f3, bishop e6. And black is absolutely fine. We're getting ready to castle queenside. We're putting pressure on the e5 pawn. This is a good position. So the point is that we're counterattacking d4. And so if white were to respond to the attack on the bishop by taking c6, we take back with pawn, not knight. Why pawn? It's because, again, the entire goal is to blockade the light squares. We want to control this pawn center. So by taking back with the pawn, we have a near permanent control over the d5 square. Again, so say white castles, knight f5. This is a nice counterattack on d4. White protects this pawn. We play bishop b4. This move gets us ready to castle. And this is a good position. And keep in mind, black is up he's up a knight for, well, I guess 2 pawns now, but the white pawn center has lost its flexibility. These pawns are on dark squares now. And this white's remaining bishop is on the dark square. So let's go back here. So knight ge7. So the best move for white is to play bishop g5 to pin the knight that is attacking d5. But no big deal. We play bishop e6. So we put another attacker on the d5 square. We want to conquer d5. And again, if the bishop retreats, then the d pawn is hanging. So white should exchange here. And yeah, this has weakened the structure a little bit. But, I mean, this pawn is moved from f7 up to e6, where it's helping to fight for the light squares in the center. Queen h5 check, g6, queen h3. So now white is attacking e6, but we can just defend it. Now bishop f6, rook g8. And this is a fine position, where black is ready to castle queenside. And keep in mind, we still have our extra piece. So yeah, after bishop g4, d5, I think a very good move. Maybe not the best move in the position, but it's thematic. We want to play this move, pawn to d5, to free up the black position. We want to be fighting for the light squares. So that's e5, where after knight g8, black is getting ready to play d5. And if white stops it with bishop c4, I suggest d5. Just sacrificing a pawn in order to gain the control over the light squares. So so that is pawn to e5. There is also d5. Now this is attacking black's other knight. So the knight could go into the center. But if the knight goes into the center, white is going to play f4. And then white is going to be able to play e5. And there's no reason to allow this. So keep in mind, we are up a knight for a pawn. And one of the nice things about being up a material is sometimes you can return the material for strategic gain. So I suggest, after e5, I suggested that black retreat the knight to g8. But after d5, I suggest that we just leave the knight there. Let white take on c6 and play a developing move instead. Bishop b4. This is a very safe way to play against the Halloween Gambit. So white, being down a piece, probably got to take here, right? D takes c6. And now, keep in mind, this pawn at c6, we could take back this pawn, but we're in no hurry to take the pawn at c6, because any way this pawn at c6 takes us, if it takes d7, we get to develop our bishop in response. If it takes b7, we get to develop our bishop in response. So we can ignore this pawn at c6 for the time being and play a better move instead. Knight takes e4, taking advantage of the fact that this knight is pinned. So now black is getting ready to take on c3. Now, white has a good move here. White can play queen d4. This is the salvation of white's position, because white is protecting c3 and also attacking the bishop at b4 and the knight at e4. But black has a good move in response, queen e7. This protects. It protects. We're getting ready to move this knight for discovered check. So white's response is pretty much force bishop e3. And now here, we could take here. We could take here, we could take here, but there's no hurry to do any of that. Let's just promote our development. Let's castle. Get the king out of the center. Like I said, that this knight's pinned. This pawn. I mean, if the pawn takes us, it just facilitates our development. There's no hurry to do anything here for black. So now white should play bishop d3. Developing move. Now this knight at e4 is threatened. So we just exchange it. We take at c3. And then b takes c3. The bishop is attacked. It's better to drop the bishop back, in this case, to the center rather than to the edge. Just play bishop d6. And now black's development is pretty much finished. And given the move, black would like to play d takes c6. But it's white's move, and white probably wants to do something about that to avoid going down a pawn. So white takes b7. And then we develop with bishop takes b7. And this is a perfectly fine position for black. Completely level. So this is how to survive the Halloween Gambit. Again, so let's do a quick recap. So after knight takes e5, we take the knight that they're offering us. After white plays d4, expanding their center, we drop back to c6, drop back where it came from. And then, if e5, then you drop the knight back to g8 with the intention of playing d5. If white plays d5, then we simply let them take this knight, and we play bishop b4, setting up the counterattack on e4. D takes c6, knight takes e4, and then we want to prioritize our development with queen e7 and castles. That's the Halloween Gambit. So now let's talk about the Vienna Gambit. So it starts out the same way. e4, e5, knight c3. And now if black plays knight f6, white plays f4. So in the Vienna Gambit, white is trying to deflect the e-pawn from the center in order to play e4, e5, followed up by knight f3 and d4. So white is giving this gambit pawn in order to exploit the knight on f6 and expand in the center. And there's only one good move here. If black tries to defend with the knight, white is just going to exchange pawns and then play d4. Kind of like the Halloween Gambit, right? Except white didn't sacrifice a piece. So, and if black plays d6, protecting the pawn with a pawn, then we end up with a passive position with this bishop locked inside the pawn chain. That's not ideal either. So black should play d5. Again, white is offering a gambit pawn, so black should respond energetically in the center with d5. This is the only good move in this position when white plays f4, is to counter with d5. Now, white should take on e5 here. If white plays knight f3, I don't know, new variation, this probably transposes to the same thing after knight takes e4. Again, knight f3. I guess you could also consider taking d takes e4. But again, most cases, white is going to respond by taking with pawn at e5. And black, the knight is threatened, so the knight just takes back at e4. So here, a couple moves that we could consider for white. The most obvious move is just developing the knight, knight f3. If white tries queen f3, the point of this move is that white is threatening the e4 knight twice. So white is trying to get black to exchange at c3 when white is going to take back with the d pawn and accelerate their development with bishop f4 and quick queenside castles. But there's a good move that black has in response. Instead of taking c3, which is possible, I'm going to suggest knight c6 instead. This is a good move because it sets up a counter threat of knight d4, which takes advantage of the c2 square, which is vacated. It's undefended now that the queen has moved out. So the best move for white is to play bishop e5 to neutralize this knight. And then the game might go knight takes c3, d takes c3, a6. asking this bishop what it's going to do. And if the bishop retreats, then black can consider chopping this free pawn at e5. So white probably takes here, and then b takes, and this is a perfectly reasonable position for black. Because this queen is currently standing in the way of the best square for the knight, which is at f3. So after queen f3, knight c6. Again, when white plays queen f3, you respond with knight c6. And the point of knight c6 is that if white captures here, this is a tactical mistake, because not takes back, but knight d4. This is a Zwischen, intermediate move. Instead of recapturing here, the knight moves, it attacks the queen, it attacks c2. So white has to move the queen, the best square is to go to c3, and then d takes, and this knight is very well placed. So this is a good position for black. So again, yeah, queen f3 is diffused with knight c6. What about knight f3? Well, knight f3 doesn't put any immediate pressure on e4, so we can play a developing move here. And I suggest bishop e7. This move is very solid. The idea of bishop e7, it prepares us to castle, and it also cultivates this square g5. So black doesn't have to exchange always at c3. Black can drop the knight back and challenge white's knight at f3. All right, so white, in my opinion, should play d4. This move has the obvious drawback of this e4 knight can no longer be attacked by a pawn. But the alternatives, they both lead to the same thing. If white plays d3 instead, attacking the knight, I suggest not taking at c3, but instead going back to g5. Again, this looks like it loses time, but the knight wants to exchange off for white's strong knight at f3. So after white plays d4, for instance, we just trade. It's necessary to take at this move. Knight takes f3 check, queen takes, and then knight c6. Again, when the queen comes to f3, we play knight c6, counterattacking at d4. Again, if white pins our knight, then we just protect e6. And we're getting ready to castle. And then later on, we might play f6 to challenge white's spearhead, but that's far in the future. The goal is surviving the opening for now. So that's d3. Queen e2 amounts to the same thing. Again, we can take at c3, but I suggest not to, and play this drop back instead, knight g5. And if white answers with d4, then knight takes, queen takes, and knight c6 is the same thing. So the only line that's different is after bishop e7 when white plays d4. And here I suggest just castle. White can answer with bishop d3, and now the knight is attacked by two pieces, so we have to do something about it. It's possible to try a move like bishop f5 or f5, but I suggest just taking. Just take on c3. B takes c3 and c5. And this is a fine position for black. We play c5 to start some action against the white center. And then we can think about developing the bishop, developing the knight, getting the rooks to open files. Sometimes black can consider playing c4 to push this bishop back and then launch the pawn storm on the queen side. But anyway, that's the Vienna Gambit. So e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6. If f4, d5 is the move to play. You must play d5 to create tension in the center. And if f takes e5, well, first of all, if knight f3, then you can do either move. Pawn takes or knight takes are both reasonable. If f takes e, you have to play knight takes e. And then, knight takes, pawn takes is no problem because now the black queen is very strong. You could consider playing like, I don't know, queen d5 or queen d4, trying to surround this weak pawn at e5. So trading is not something that wants to do there. So instead, taking, and then white wants to develop with knight f3. Queen f3 is bad because of knight c6. Knight f3, and because white is not attacking the e4, it's not threatening the e4 knight. We get a developing move. We play bishop e7, and then this allows us, if white attacks this knight again with d3 or queen e2, then we can play the knight back to g5 and challenge the knight at f3. If white plays d4 instead, then we just castle, develop normally, chop d3, and play c5. And that's a very simple way to get out of the opening with a reasonable position against the Vienna Gambit. I hope you enjoyed this video.